let's just start on how to get good at limited.
Unfortunately, the first answer is people overvalue this a little bit in Fab because you will not always have the best deck.
When this new set drops, what are the first steps that you take?
I don't spend a lot of time, like, drafting doesn't work that way. I don't want to start a fire. So one thing I'll talk about testing teams, and then you sit down and there's 3 people in front of you that have the same idea like you, and then you are in a very uncomfortable space.
Welcome to Draw 4, where I draw 4 with the best flesh and blood players. Today I'm talking to Florin Christian Loghin, who won the recent limited calling in Barcelona. Florin, welcome to the show.
Hello, nice to see you.
This wasn't your first top ranking in a major tournament, right?
Yes, I was fortunate enough to cover a few other events, mostly in constructed, so this was, let's say, a first for me. I'm also really happy that it was a limited format, as I enjoy limited more than constructed at the moment. So it was great success, let's say, for me.
Congratulations again on this major win, because limited is quite controversial at the moment in Flesh and Blood, but you just mentioned you really love it at the moment, and that's exactly what we want to talk about today, how to get good at limited and your view on limited format in Flesh and Blood. So we will reveal 4 topics to dive into for you, and let's start with the first one. So at first, let's talk about what actually made you win the calling in Barcelona.
I'll split into 2. The first part was sealed, day 1. So there, I put together Tekla Vosen deck like I think most people in sealed. I think this is for a lot of people the winning strategy in sealed. I won't go too much into detail on the deck. It was a very, let's say, above average Tekla Vosen deck and did the job. Then I ended the day 7-1. Day 2, there were 2 drafts in Swiss, and then followed by top 8, which was also draft. The first draft, I was on Dash, rather than, like most people think, Tekla Vosen. This was a very weird build. I had a lot of defensive items, which is kind of, let's say, a more unusual way to draft Dash. I think I had 5 plasma shields and 4 dissolving shields red, so I was like full value Dash plan. Fortunately for me, I think people didn't realize exactly what I was doing, and they thought I would be the more aggressive, play boom grenades from the top Dash, which allowed me to, let's say, move the game longer and get the value out of the items. And then the second draft, I drafted Max, which I kind of end up more on than I want to. And basically both my Max decks look pretty much similar. So both in the last Swiss draft as well as in the final, in the top 8. And this Max deck is it's not so much let's say what most people came to play, which is this building big turns, so 3 card, 5 cards Max decks where they like leak damage, and at the end they try to build a big overpowered turn and then kill you that way with the various buffs that you can have. But it was a value Max deck. Essentially, every time you boost, you have to attack with Banksy. That's the number 1 rule of that deck, because the card you boost, you basically get back with the Banksy attack, and the Banksy attack kind of threatens on hits to a certain degree. Usually just threatens an extra counter, but so it takes a card usually out of their hand. If you have a powerful item on board, then they definitely need to block it. Otherwise, you keep the item for another turn, and then that values too much. Yeah, so that's kind of how it went through. I mean, I had different games. I played against Tekla Vosens. I played against Dash. I played one Max mirror. Due to the way my deck is built up, I just trade favorably round for round, and then I eventually deck them out. So the Max deck, this sounds very, let's say, weird, maybe to some, that a Max deck, which usually is the one that is threatened to be decked, is the one that is doing the decking. But yeah, essentially it's just a value deck that fatigues 2 damage. That's kind of the path. In the top 8, maybe I can talk about a little bit. So I played against a lot of good players in the Swiss and also in the top 8, and I think this video would take too long if we go over every single game. But top 8, I played against Polish player who was in tech levels, that came down to the last card. If I didn't sequence properly, then we were going to a draw, and then we would have to replay. But unfortunately for me, unfortunately for my opponent, I found the right line and had exact lethal with the last card in the deck. Then in the Swiss, I played against my good friend Valentin Makli. He was on tech levels. Similar idea of just fatiguing and just blocking well, and then presenting good attacks, taking cards from his deck. And then in the final, I played against a Dash player who I had played previously in the Swiss as well. And then I was just very careful to preserve my life total. So played as safe as possible. I think I was up on cards as well from the beginning, so I presented 38, I believe, and they presented 35. Maybe I'm off by a few cards, but essentially I didn't see any reoccurring item, if I remember correctly, so I can just, let's say, play very conservatively with my life total, and then just block as well as possible, keep my life total up. And then when they do have a good turn with an overpower and a grenade, that's when I take the hit and drop low, and then they would have to present another one later, and then that's just a bit difficult if I'm also applying pressure. And then, yeah, I won. Was a very long day, so everything kind of like melded together. At the end, it was more of a relief, let's say, but very, very happy with how it went. Of course, Valentin Makli was also, they tested with also top 8, so we were both very, very happy.
So a limited calling like this is pretty exhausting. And how do you think, did it give you an edge that you were so experienced on a long run on a tournament, or what was it actually that you had over your opponents?
First of all, being lucky is always good. And I think anyone who wins a tournament will testify that you do need a little bit of luck as well. But other than that, I mean, it's because it's, let's say, especially draft. We had 2 drafts and then top 8. It gets very tiring because it's a little bit unknown always. So even if you draft a lot, like the decks and the matchup is always a little bit unknown. You have to juggle a bit more balls. In Classic Constructed, when you've played a matchup 30, 40 times, let's say you can focus on the intricacies that come up in the game. But your game plan is kind of fixed and you kind of know what's going on. While in Limited, you need to, let's say, have mentally a little bit more on your plate, especially with your deck's changes from draft to draft. So you again have to be aware of what's in your deck, what outs you have, what tools you still have, yeah. And there is the unknown. In TC, you can be surprised by a few cards that the opponents play, but you have a pretty good idea what's coming out of the opponent's deck. In draft, sometimes yes, sometimes no. Yes, how many boom grenades does Dash play? How many overpowers? Does the Teklevosen have a War Machine or Annihilation Engine or however they're called in their deck? Do I need to stay on 7 life, let's say, for example? Yeah, things like that need to be aware of. I think since we drafted a lot in preparation, we were kind of, both me and Valentin, were, let's say, used to playing a lot of drafts in a row in the same day. So I think that was good. And yeah, I think preparing in draft and being able to, let's say, be fluid and kind of accept your seat that you're in. We worked a lot on this to be able to have plan B, plan C, plan D. What does that look like? So yeah, I think that's where we had the edge, I guess. And we got lucky, or I got lucky in the right times, the right spots. That's also important.
So then let's talk about the limited calling as it is. Do you think a limited calling is something that you enjoy really much also in the future compared to CC, or what do you think about the limited calling?
So of course it will always depend on the choice of the set, but I think LSS is doing it seems to be progressively getting better. The issue with the limited is it would be ideal if it's just draft. However, we live in the real world and we have to accept the, let's say, limitations and difficult intricacies of having 1,000 people draft at one time. Sealed is a little bit easier, let's say, to do this. In an ideal world, we would just have draft, 3 drafts, and then 2 drafts, day 2, and then top 8. But I understand that this is not really appealing to tournament organizers, and I don't envy them if they would have to organize this. So the issue is the sealed. That's what a lot of people didn't like. A lot of people were also There were kind of jokes going around. I hope to day 2 at World, so I don't have to play the Calling sealed and stuff like this. But the way my approach was, yes, let's just sit down, open our pool, and then we'll see where it goes. Yeah. But I understand that the sealed experience can be a little frustrating, depending on pool strength. So that especially in private bets is the best example. If you don't have access to enough evos, you can't play Teklo, and if you can't play Teklo, the other decks need to be very good to keep up. Let's say, not to say it's impossible. Also, battle hardened Dallas Fort Worth, I played Max and sealed. Who was good enough for top 8. There was a dash player that went undefeated, if I remember correctly, in Swiss, so sealed. So it's possible. However, of course, Teklo wasn't. It's just, let's say, the path of least resistance. But yeah, I can see why people don't like it. But however, I do believe that like draft, especially if the quality of drafting keeps up and improves, I definitely think it's for me personally a lot of fun, and I hope we get more of it. But I understand that, like I said, the limitations of it.
All right, and then to all the viewers who are listening, leave a like for Florin for winning the Calling, but also now sharing his knowledge here on the limited format. Florin, let's continue to the second topic that I want you to dive into, and that is actually how to get good at limited. And we even got a few comments over on Twitter when I announced that we will talk about the Calling in Barcelona and also the limited format. So let's just start on your first thought about how to get good at limited.
Yes, where do we start? Unfortunately, the first answer is you have to play a lot of limited. This can be a little bit difficult to in person. However, there are certain online tools that allow a simulation of a draft. I won't get into that topic. I know that this is, let's say, a heated debate. However, I think there is no way around it. You need to play. Now, how do you practice for draft? What does that look like? I'll talk a little bit more about this. You need to be comfortable on all heroes. Again, not something people want to hear. There's a lot of forcers out there that enjoy to play one hero and one hero only. However, even if that is your strategy, or that does turn out to be the best strategy, you need to be aware of what each deck looks like, what their winning plans are. So what is their road to victory? So when then you're playing, you know what they're doing, and you can react accordingly and change or make your plan fit that plan better. So how to do this? The way I do it is at the beginning of a draft, I will look at the classes, and then I will just force the first 3 drafts I'm forcing Teklo, the next 3 drafts I'm forcing Max, the next 3 decks I'm forcing Dash. Of course, not great. You shouldn't force, blah, blah, but you need to pick cards to see how they start interacting together more and more. Also be aware when you're drafting at the beginning, what does the 3-0 deck look like in the pod? What did they draft? What was their winning strategy? Talk to that person, like, hey, what felt good, what felt bad, etc., etc. You don't have to play every single draft yourself. It's important to talk to the other people at the table to get an idea. Yeah. I can give you an example of this. One of our testing teammates told us there was this plasma shield, the one with ward, and it's like, hey, this card's actually very good value in Max because you just play it off you just play it out, crank it, and attack with Banksy. And they have to block the Banksy, otherwise you get a counter again on the shield. And this is a card that you get very late. This card is very unintuitive to play in Max at the beginning because you want to be aggressive, right? Boost, attack. But if they tell you this, then you look at it, you try it out yourself, it feels good. It's like building a wall with bricks, yeah? You start at the bottom and you add bricks. You don't have to add every brick yourself. You can get other people to help you. So that's kind of, let's say, how you progress through. And then, of course, as you keep going deeper and deeper, then you start to become more flexible. Once you know how each deck is supposed to look like, it also helps you, let's say, navigate drafts and being, let's say, a bit more fluid. This surfing, where you're not decided on one hero you want to be. Coming from other TCGs, this concept there is much, for example, Magic, where there is a similar drafting process. People in that game are used to being open for longer before they decide. In Flesh and Blood, you decide quite early what you want to be, even if you are being, let's say, not forcing, but you are still kind of, by the end of pack 1, you are pretty much fixed what you're going to be. It's very rare that you have not yet decided. However, if you don't know what other decks look like, you can't switch because you don't know what's open. The next thing is reading signals. Let's say a little bit, people overvalue this a little bit in Fab, because there were more cards in this set that were so-called bombs, so like game-breaking cards, let's say, or game-winning cards. What is a bomb for dash? Yeah, like a bomb is not, like, basically it should pull you into dash if you're not dash, but which card are you going to get? Pick 7 that you're like, oh, I need to be this. Also, reading signals, people evaluate cards differently, especially at the beginning of the packs. Even at Worlds, people had different evaluations of cards. So I think it's important to fundamentally build solid decks rather than, let's say, chase ghosts or chase, let's say, how do you want to call it? I don't know. The chase the 3-0 deck, yeah? So my approach is, if I 2-1 in draft, it's not the end of the world. If you need to 3-0 for whatever reasons, then of course, then you need to, that's a different discussion. You need to draft differently because you need to 3-0 for whatever tournament reasons. But other than that, going 2-1 in the draft is good. Yeah, this is more like general topics. I don't think there's a point in me going into very much detail how to draft Bright Lights, considering that the format is over. Also, another point that I see is, while online testing with let's say, pickup groups, people will drop at 0-1. So they don't want to play after they go 0-1. This is really bad. To get, let's say, it's very important to make good. Getting a 2-1 with a mediocre or bad deck is as equal an achievement as 3-0ing with the most busted deck at the table. Learn to play bad decks. Learn to figure out how to squeeze water from stone, let's say. This is very, very important. Because you will not always have the best deck. For whatever reason. You misread something, the person in front of you switched correctly or incorrectly, it doesn't matter. You get influenced by other people's decision in the draft. Your packs just didn't open well. Happens, yeah. A lot of things can just happen that are outside of your control. So you need to do with what you get, and you need to practice playing bad decks as well. I think that's what's important. And yeah, play each deck. Play each strategy that the decks have. Usually certain decks have, let's say, varying strategies. Give an example of Outsiders. There is I'm gonna trick with Uzuri every single turn, yeah, and then there is I'm gonna block well and just present a good attack with Uzuri. Yeah, slightly different decks. There are the tricks that you can play, or fewer tricks, stuff like this. If we go to Bright Lights with Max, there's the aggro Max, and then there's this mid-range value Max that we kind of also played. Other people also played this. I played against Pudding, that top 8 at Worlds. He had a similar deck from what I saw when I played against them. You need to be aware of what decks look like, and then this also, like I said, this changes how you play against them when you're playing it. I hope that kind of gave you some sort of idea.
Yeah, so you brought up an interesting topic, and that is that Bright Lights, the limited format, will soon end because we are getting a new set. And when this new set drops, what are the first steps that you take to get good at the new limited format?
Yeah, so first of all, of course, usually it starts in a pre-release, right? Where everyone kind of, or pre-release, however you want to call it, spoiler season. I don't spend a lot of time like fine combing through spoilers. I think this is a bit time inefficient. So usually what will happen is we'll just go to pre-releases. We'll play the pre-releases as many as we can. So me and people on the testing team. And then there it anyway almost trickles through what is strong and what isn't strong, just by nature of how games play out, right? And then we start looking at that hero. For example, tech levels, and that's how tech levels came to be, right? Everyone in Sealed was very successful tech levels, and then there was this idea of like, okay, maybe this hero's just that strong that we just force it in draft no matter what. I heard some crazy stories of certain testing teams where 8 people play Teklevossen, which for sure is wrong. Yeah, that just cannot be right. But the way I approach drafting at the beginning is I try to play as gimmicky as possible on that hero. So, for example, Dash, I try to play as much as possible with the items and get into the core mechanic of the deck, because you can always take steps back, right? So I can always play less items and play less gimmicky Dash and play more like a good attacks, good block Dash. I can always retrace my steps, right? But if it turns out that that is the best way to play, I already want to play as many games as possible in, let's say, a more complicated scenario. So Dash has quite Dash.io, I'm talking about, has like quite a few intricacies in how to play and what to boost and how you can refresh the top of your deck to play an item, extra action points, and so on and so forth. So if you never try it out to play it as gimmicky as possible, then it's harder to go to that step when you have to learn the Dash. Yeah, and then, like I said, go into the cycle of trying each hero, trying it out, see what works, see what doesn't work, identify what are good cards. Usually good cards in Fab are just good cards on value. So good red attacks. What is a good red attack in this set? Or what is good for this set itself? How many 3 blocks are there? Like, what is the average? It's not a mathematical to the final drop of calculating my average block is 2.537. It doesn't need to be that detailed. But you should be aware of, for example, for one hits. Like, if the opponent doesn't have that often 2-3 blocks in hand, then a 6 attack with the on hit becomes quite relevant, right? Because they can't block it out. For example, Benji kind of had this problem, or the ninjas had this problem as an outsiders. If we have 3 blocks galore, then it's just a 6 is just 2 cards. Then I need to get to 7, or I need to be on a 4 if there are no 4 blocks. And that's kind of how cards start to, let's say, trickle down. And then, of course, through iteration, through drafting, you also become more aware of what's the game plan. And then once you filter what each hero wants to be doing, what the game plan is, or each hero and each strategy, then it kind of automatically starts falling in place. It's like walking through a little bit through the fog, and then it kind of starts opening and you see the meadow in the wood. These aha moments start kind of happening. So I think that be comfortable with this unknown, and the more important thing is don't care about your results at the beginning of the drafting. I mean, don't care about it either at the end, because it doesn't define how well you are you play as a drafter or whatever. But yeah, basically be curious, I guess. That's how I approach format. Be as curious, see what people do, everything that is kind of cute. Like, ask the people, if you see something cute, ask them, hey, how does this work? How difficult is this to pull off, right? Sometimes someone will do something in draft where you're like, hey, that seems really strong what you just did. But what you didn't see is that they have to have that card in Arsenal for 2 turns, and then they didn't have enough blue pitching because they actually need 2 blue pitch and then 2 other cards. And you're like, how does that play if I'm attacking into you every single turn? Like, you'll need to figure this out as well, how it looks like from the other side, not only when you receive the boom grenade overpower for, I don't know, 12 or something. Yeah, this kind of sort of thing. How awkward it is to randomly wake up with 3 items in hand and just die randomly even though you're winning the game. That's kind of my approach to when it's starting. Just be as curious as possible and see as many decks as possible. And don't get stuck on this. I know card players love this. This is really good and this is really bad. This binary of, wow, this card, pack one, pick one, this card is trash, you can never put it in your deck. Like, this doesn't exist in draft, really. It's very nuanced. Everything is on a scale. Everything is on a spectrum, let's say. Brace the ugly children as well, so to say. Because those are the ones that will be good to you, that you're picking late.
So when the next set drops, you are not one of the players that is immediately looking up all the cards that are spoiled, but when the process is going down and you have a few weeks of practice in, is it good to learn the whole card list for the set and, like you said, get the good cards in your mind to be aware of?
Yes, I mean, you will naturally see them anyway. So that's why I think that just depends from person to person how they learn. But for me, I learn better by seeing things happen. The cards in vacuum are also a little bit more difficult to evaluate, let's say, rather than when we played out. There are people who can do this, that can precisely say, they read a card and they're like, okay, this is a very, very strong card, and know immediately in which scenario and how to play with it. I am not one of them. I have to, let's say, see a little bit the creative process. So yeah, that's why I think it's fine. Of course, be hyped for spoilers, but learn by doing. I think it's easier. Is my approach at least.
Yeah. So before we close out this topic, you mentioned the different learning types of people for drafting and playing limited, but let's close this topic with you mentioning the one thing that every player can do when it comes to the next limited season.
What they can do? I don't want to start a fire, but play as much as possible. Another question is going to be, how do I play as much as possible if I can't get 8 people around me? There are certain possibilities online to simulate a draft if it's not possible in person. I strongly recommend these because that is just the best way. It's just this. I mean, people can help you and people can tell you pick lists. I also wouldn't work on pick lists and this sort of stuff that you follow religiously or whatever. Oh, I saw on so-and-so's draft guide, that I should always pick Big Bertha third. It's the third strongest card, and I should always pick it if I see it because the other 2 cards on this list are not in the pack. Drafting doesn't work that way, or in my experience. Sometimes you will draft the Big Bertha. I'm just giving a out of the box example here. I'm not saying Big Bertha is a highly picked card.
Yes,
it just happens to be the card that's right in front of him on the table. It's yeah. What I was saying is, you have to be flexible in your approach, but you also so in terms of drafting, also try new things during practice. Yeah, it's very easy to, let's say, go to do a draft, do one of the first few drafts, do well with the deck, have an idea how to draft the deck, then you keep soft forcing that deck or hard forcing, however, there's different levels to this, and then you are stuck. That's the only thing you can do then. And then you go play Pro Quest, you play a Calling, you play Pro Tour, you play Worlds, and the only thing you can do is draft that. And then you sit down and there's 3 people in front of you that have the same idea like you, and then you are in a very uncomfortable space. Yeah. So also, if you are soft forcing the deck, pick other cards at least. Try new things. Yeah, I understand if you're playing a higher stakes event that this is not always possible, or it's not always comfortable, let's say. Try to break out of the comfort box as often as possible and try new things. That is how you'll find cards that other people, let's say, don't value as highly, and you will get them later in the packs, and then you will generate value like that. This touches a little bit on more, let's say, deeper how to approach actual draft picking. Maybe we'll do that another time.
Yeah. So to all the viewers who still have questions on how to get good at limited, drop your questions down in the comments and take part in the conversation about the limited format. So Florin, let's jump into the third topic. And you already talked a little bit about it, and that is forcing a certain hero in limited. We saw this during all the different recent limited formats for the last sets. What are your first thoughts that are popping up when you're seeing a person forcing a certain hero, let's say Teklovossen and Bright Lights, and then not being able to jump on another strategy?
I know there was a little bit of back and forth about this, and some people memed a little bit regarding Teklovossen. There was also Phi in Uprising, I think, was an example of this. Personally, I can tell you, when I sit down, I am on the plan of forcing Teklovossen. I don't think that there's a lie. There are people who have other ideas, but there is a reason why the best hero is the best hero. So, talking about Teklovossen particularly, it's the ceiling, if you want to talk about it like this, the ceiling and the floor of each hero, right? So, if I force Teklovossen, and there are 4 Teklovossens at my table, I get enough evos and everything looks fine. even if I have to play against, let's say, that one dash player that has a very good deck. Maybe I could just dodge them, maybe I just don't play them until I'm playing for 3-0, right? If I play them at 3-0, I lose, okay, I'm 2-1, I'm happy. If I lose early to that deck, I'm still playing against other Teklovosens that also have mediocre decks. So as long as I'm, let's say, confident in how to play the mirror, and I kind of know how to navigate these bad decks, I talked about a little bit about this earlier, then I'm fine with that as well, because then I'll just win in the 1-1 bracket or in the 0-1 bracket, and I can somehow save my draft in that way. So that's how I start thinking about this Teklovosen forcing and not forcing. The issue starts to be, you should always kind of have a, let's say, preferential direction you want to go with your draft. You don't have the time, especially at the called events, but also at armors, you don't have the time to mull over each pick and be like, okay, I don't know, where do I want to go with this? Like, kind of this like lost drafting. You want to sit down, you see the first pack, you order your cards. What are the strong cards in the packs? What does this mean? Let's say I have 2 Evos in the pack. I'm passing 2 Evos down the line, so I kind of know that they're going to be incentivized to be Teklovosen. So when it's coming back in pack 2, I'm not going to see a lot of Teklovosen cards. And then I have a really good dash card, then I'll just pick the dash card and let them be Teklovosen to my left. By the way, if I only see 1 Evo, I pick the Evo. It's fine. I can, let's say, push the other cards to the left. They're not so incentivized to be Evo, so if I keep cutting Teklovosen, then I can become Teklovosen. It's not so much the... I don't think you can hard force. I wouldn't recommend to anyone to hard force. But if you have very little time and very little, let's say, preparation, it is probably correct to force. And just hold your breath longer than everyone else behind you in the draft. And just force Teklovosen and then just try to go 2-1. The problem with the other heroes, coming back to the floor and the ceiling concept, if I force a max deck, and there are 3 other max decks at my table, it gets difficult. Yeah. Let's say there are 4 max decks. That's a catastrophe for everyone. You can still say, okay, you're still playing against 4 max decks and then everyone. But I'm never going to 3-0 with a... Or never is a strong word, but it's going to be very difficult if there are 4, or if there are 4 dash players and I have no items and I have no attacks. Like, that can just be catastrophic failure, and I 3-0 and I 0-3, and then my tournament is over. So 0-3ing in draft is, especially the way the structure is now for Pro Tour and Worlds, if you 0-3 your first or your second draft, it's really, really bad for you. And I think there were a lot of stories of people going very well in CC and not doing well in draft. One of our teammates went, I think, 7-1 in CC and went 2-4 in draft. And I think they missed cash. At the moment, the way that the tiebreaker system works, drafting is as important, if not more, for topping. Then that's why you also want to mitigate your risk. So that's what I'm talking about forcing. I don't think it's correct to say never force, but I also don't think it's correct to say always force no matter what. At least the limited formats we've seen so far. It can be that a format comes out where it just so happens to be that everyone's going to be 1 hero. I don't think that will ever happen, but I don't want to say that it will never happen. So that's to talk a little bit about the forcing.
All right.
Like I said,
so,
yeah.
Do you want to add anything, or?
No, I just wanted to... People are also on the just in general, again, coming back to the way people talk in TCGs, they're very binary on this topic, where it's like it's always wrong to force, or it's always right to force, or I don't think there is... It's a very, let's say, shade of gray between the white and the black. Depends where you are, what's your preparation, where you are in the tournament, what result you need from the draft, etc., 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 which is, let's say, more defining. If you're at an armory and you just want to have fun and you just want to play the hero, then force the hero. It's fine. Yeah. If you're learning, if you're testing, and you want to learn how to play dash, then force dash. How else are you going to get the reps on a hero if you have no experience on the hero, and you always evaluate Teklovosen cards higher because that's where you're used to from sealed? You're never going to go naturally into dash. So that's why people are like, oh, but you're forcing Teklo again. It's like, no, I'm not forcing Teklo, but it's just, I know these cards, I know how to play this hero, so these cards are more appealing to me. And then that's how people kind of also are, like, don't trick themselves into forcing, but it's like this comfort. I think a lot of people force out of comfort, let's say, rather than, oh, I'm forcing no matter what, and it's a strategical decision and so on and so forth.
Yeah, also from what I hear in the community is that a lot of people wish we had more resources to learn how to play limited and how to get really good at it. And that is actually the last topic I want to bring up here, is how to balance for these big tournaments when you have classic constructed and also limited on the line. You gave us a lot of insights already on that, but let's dive more deeper into this, because not everyone has a big team to really leverage on the draft. Those that have a big team, they for sure have an edge, but they also need to practice classic constructed and how to get good on that side. And you already mentioned that being a good limited player in Flesh and Blood is as important, if not more important, in comparison to the classic constructed side.
Yes. So one thing I'll talk about testing teams. We had, in preparation for Worlds, I think we were 8. We did not do a single in-house draft. I think in-house drafts have benefits, but they also have negatives. It's very easy when you're only in-house drafting to become in-house. I mean, not physically necessarily. In team drafting it gets a little bit, it goes into the self-fulfilling prophecy problematic, where, and I've talked to other teams and they've told me how they saw the drafting, and we had the exchange of ideas, and I would always kind of hear this, oh, this hero is really good and we're really high on this hero and we're really down on this hero, and no one really plays that hero when we draft, and everyone's just trying to make the Teklovosn better when there's 6 people at the Teklovosns, and how do I get an edge when there's 8 Teklovosns at the table? This sort of ideas of just sharpening that pencil to the top. And this kind of, there were pro tours where we drafted a lot, let's say internally, and what happened is there was 1 or 2 people that would always force a hero, and then they were on your right and you knew they were Icelander, for example, and then you're like, I can't be Icelander because they're going to be Icelander, and then that person always is Icelander because everyone around them knows, okay, this person likes to play Icelander, so why would I go into Icelander when they're going to be? So it kind of just, also subconsciously this happens. It's not you're going to like pointing at someone and be like, you're going to be Icelander, and then so forth. So there's also negatives to drafting always with the same people. It's the best results are always when you draft with random people that are dedicated to drafting. This also needs to be said. Unfortunately, there are different levels of people's ability in draft and different knowledge levels. And there are certain things, especially in draft, that you will be given as options when people are not that experienced in draft. While when you are drafting with a full table of fully, let's say, experienced players, that you will not be given these resources in terms of picks, in terms of the way the game plays out, certain windows to set things up in game. You will just not have these. So it's a little, you always need to be aware of that as well, let's say, when drafting in these pickup group kind of drafts. That's to talk about the drafting in the team. Balancing of between CC and limited practice, I have not solved this puzzle yet. I think also in my preparation, I tend to play a bit too much limited because it's comfortable for me. And I think that's kind of the issue, talking about comfort and moving out of the comfort zone. I prefer to play limited. This has also historic from my TCG upbringing, so to say. I used to draft a lot and play limited a lot in other card games. And I just enjoy playing limited because it's new, kind of. It's a new puzzle. It's always, while CC is at times in certain metas extremely tedious for me. And when something is a little bit too repetitive, let's say, I can't focus to the level that I should. If someone has maybe someone else can answer that question out there that has solved that puzzle, the balance between CC, but definitely you have to give the attention to both formats in equal measure. It also, the limited is the work that you cannot really cheat on, let's say, as well. So in CC, cheating, I mean, in the sense of cutting corners. So if you have a team, let's say there's 8 of you or whatever size, let's say there's 3 of you, and you're all playing Icelander, for example. I don't need to test the Icelander matchup into 5 because my other teammate tested it and they give me the rundown of, hey, this is what's important. This is the sideboard. This is how the games go. This is how the games go when you're winning. This is how the game goes when you're losing. These are the tricks that happen in this matchup. These are the, let's say, this is what you need to be aware of. And then I drastically reduce my my playing time. Of course, I can do the same in Limited. I can tell you how to play the value max deck. Okay, this is never boost without swinging your hammer, never blah, blah. But you need to draft. You need to get to that deck. You need to make the decisions pick for pick for pick to get to the deck. And what I saw is when I'm drafting in our own drafting, let's say in the team, when we're practicing, there would be, after a while, a certain consensus of what the picks are, where people are almost picking the same cards, like kind of separately from each other, because that's what that deck is kind of supposed to look like, right? You can also say this also comes from this sharpening the pencil and the idea that if you play a lot internally, then everyone's going to come to the same cards that they like and cards that they dislike. But if you don't draft yourself, even if you know everything in theory, you're not going to have the time as well in the actual drafting process. You don't have that much time. This is very important, like at a called draft. So you need to draft to be comfortable with the picks. That's why. So maybe it's more important to practice Limited. But maybe I shouldn't be saying this. Maybe I should be telling people, guys, don't practice Limited. Leave Limited to the people who want to put the time in. Everyone else should focus on CC. But yeah, I think that's kind of the thing. And a more general approach while playing Limited is be aware of what the winning condition is for the opponent. What is your winning condition? And then play towards that winning condition. There was this approach, like not recently, it has been already since last year, since Icelander was good last year. Mm-hmm. There has been this pushing of the narrative of play maximum value for each hand. This Bulllander principle, block with 2 cards, attack for 8, or attack for 7 and gain them life, right? So you maximize the value. True and Limited, still true. But you need to be aware of what is going to happen if I play the game out hand for hand like this to completion. What does that look like? Sometimes you need to take damage to setup, and sometimes you need to push someone's life down that you get into the window for your setup. So for example, when you have that overpower boom grenade turn, they need to be low enough to die to that, because if they're on 12 life and you overpower with a boom grenade and they take 9 damage and they go to 4 or to 3 or to 2 or to whatever they go, and you have no more gas in your deck, it doesn't matter. You will still lose the game later on. Yeah, I think this is maybe the best tip while playing Limited. Be aware of what you're trying to do and what they're trying to do, with the information you have, obviously, of course. And that's what I love about Limited. You don't know. It's all calculated guesses, yeah. Do they still have another boom grenade? Do they still have another hydraulic press? Do they have the script to get the hydraulic press back? That's what's fun about Limited. I know that that's the third CNC and the third pummel. I guess you know that in Limited as well, kind of. But like, how many pummels is Bravo playing? Are they playing 3? Are they playing 2? Are they playing 1? And so on and so forth. That's just as a side example, yeah.
I think in Limited you have a real problem if someone is dropping 3 CNCs on you with a pummel, but that's another topic.
Who knows? Who knows what's coming out in the big hitters, yeah? Yeah. Maybe we get a pummel.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe pummel, a Marvel pummel.
Oh, that would be nice.
All right, so let's close this topic then and maybe come back to this one in the future, because I think this is something that a lot of players are looking for, how to balance the formats. But those insights that you've already given us are amazing, I think. So after we have drawn these 4 topics, let's imagine you have an Arsenal card. Would you reveal from your Arsenal to give away to the players that are still watching here at the end?
Which card I would reveal from Arsenal? I mean, it's kind of difficult now to not say pummel, right? After we just talked about.
That's true, but in sense of a tip or another topic.
In sense of a tip, what's the hidden Arsenal card? I don't know. I've been kind of open. I've tried not to hold too much back. I know there's this dichotomy between giving information to the public, but also leaking information. But yeah, I think enjoy. And I've said it already, but I think the biggest thing is be curious when you draft. Try things out, play around, experiment. Don't be too attached to your results while drafting, especially when you're preparing. Just be curious, try things out, see things. For me personally, it's more satisfying to find out something new in a draft, even if I 2-1 or 1-2, than 3-0ing with a boring deck that you've 3-0'd with before. So I think that's and I try. I'm not saying I'm immune to this. Of course, I also like to 3-0 drafts. Who doesn't? Yeah, who doesn't like to say I went 3-0 5 times in a row? But I think in the long run, you're gonna be more successful if you try things out.
All right. Florin, thank you so much for taking the time, giving us all these insights. And for everyone who is still watching, Florin is also on Twitter. I will link his account down in the description so you can reach out to him if you have any further questions. Like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. So we see us the next time.
Thank you, Alex. See you guys.